Welcome to Roosevelt Live Special Edition. This show today is dedicated to the Martin Luther King birthday that's coming up in a few days, along with Black History Month is coming up in February, the entire month. And we want to take a look back and a look forward on where we were as a race of people in the United States in general and where we're at today and where we're trying to go and what we're trying to achieve from this point moving forward. Um, I'm sure everybody's heard of Dr. Martin Luther King and the things that he's done during the short time that he was on this earth to try to make a difference, to try to get the United States government to recognize races of people and to protect their constitutional rights, or actually to enforce the constitutional rights that was already in place that somehow was being overlooked because somehow at that time the government was not seeing things eye to eye as we as a race of people had saw those things. And everybody knows that Dr. King, if you've ever been to Atlanta, and if you ever had the privilege to go to Martin Luther King Center, as I and my family have, and visit some of the historical points, and walk in the house where Dr. King once lived as a child, down on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, right outside the downtown area, and to visit that home, to walk through it, to actually stand in the bedroom where Dr. King slept at as a kid, to see the area where the outside of the home, the porch, the things of that nature. It was very surreal when I had the privilege to go there with my family and my youngest son, taking him to see a bit of history, something that hopefully he will never forget. An opportunity to go down to the museum and stood next to the carriage that carried Dr. King's body through the city at the time after he was memorialized, and to stand next to that and to take photos and to put your hand on that card and to think about just kind of a flashback. Even though at the time when Dr. King was assassinated, I was 5 years old, almost 6 years old at the time. But so I don't remember much as a little kid at that age, but I do remember things over the years because obviously a lot of things that happened in the Deep South, and I grew up, born and raised in Alabama, so experienced some things on levels as I came through up through the school systems there in that state, and experienced some of the racism stuff head on, and could understand what was going on at that point in time when I was a young teenager growing up in the Alabama area. Everybody know that Dr. King, was born January 15, 1929. We recognize that. We recognize that he had a lot of achievements in his life, that he was assassinated. We all know April 4th, 1968. We all know that. We all know that Dr. King entered college by the age of 15, had his doctorate by the age of 26, and won the Nobel Peace Prize by the age of 35. That in itself, if Dr. King wouldn't have done anything else, just those achievements alone are amazing for anybody. But to sacrifice and to be arrested some 20 times for all kind of bogus reasons, that people trumped up charges that was leveled against him to try to prevent him from trying to lead the people and help with some of the things that was going on during that time. It's today when I think back and look back throughout the years and think where would we be today if it wasn't for people like Dr. King and other people that went out there and stuck their neck out. And Dr. King's home was bombed, things of that nature to try to deter him from doing the things he'd done. He was stabbed when he was I think it was in Chicago, New York. He got stabbed by an individual there. So a lot of things went on with Dr. King as he went forward to try to use his voice and his status to try to move forward and keep pushing toward equal rights for everybody, trying to desegregate and do things of that nature. And it was a good thing because when I look back at this point in my life, realizing where would I individually would be, where would my family would be, when I look at the color versus white water fountains, and I look at a lot of the Jim Crow laws that was out there, I think back to this day, and I don't dislike any race because I don't think that's the answer. But the answer is to try to balance one's own self. And sometimes when I look back on the nonviolent approach that Dr. King had, I think about that versus sometimes like a Malcolm X that has a different concept on how we should have had handled what was going on around us. But I know it was hard for people to have a nonviolent approach toward people that was being violent toward them. But it was the right approach because it allowed the United States government to get involved into. It wasn't just that; it was a lot of things that happened that the government got involved. A lot of things that went on that caused an uproar. To people started to see that it just wasn't one or two people in the deep South that was complaining, but that it was actually people actually having their constitutional rights suppressed or taken away, or and sometimes even arrested. Even when we talk about Rosa Parks and her refusing to get up out of her seat on the bus in 1955. But she wasn't the first person, she wasn't the first female, nor the first person that had refused or had been approached about getting out of their seats on the bus. There were people before her. There was Joanne Robinson before her. There was a guy named Vernon. He had issues with the bus and not allowed to sit in certain places. There was another young lady, I think her name was Carlette. She also had issues when she was on the bus. So there was other people that came along before and had problems with the busing system. But that day in particular, in December 1955, when Rosa Parks wasn't just a seamstress. People say, "Oh, she was a seamstress." She was an educated woman. She college educated. She happened to be a seamstress because that was the job that she could get at the time. But that day in particular, she wasn't the only one that was sitting in the fifth row from the front of the bus. There were 4 more people that accompanied her. But when the driver said, "Hey," when the bus driver pretty much, when those empty 4 sets of seats were occupied, they wanted them to then migrate to the back so the white people that was getting on would have seats. And basically, she was the only one in that group that really refused to do that. And upon that, the bus driver had her arrested. She was fined $10. She was fined $4 court costs. Back then, $14 was a lot of money for people to, it took days to make money. You work for pennies a day, and if you're African American, you may be almost working for free. So those $14 I'm sure weighed heavy on her if she had to. I don't know if she paid to find herself or what happened when the Christian Leadership Council got together and they went out and they decided, hey, you know what? We're gonna have a boycott here. We're not gonna take this anymore. And even before then, they attempted to have a boycott. People didn't want to do it and things of that nature. It just happened to be the timing wasn't right. But this time, particular timing was right. And they boycotted and they did a good job because they boycotted those buses for 382 days. That was over a year. And to try to one of the biggest issues with the boycott was the majority of the bus riders were African American, and they had to find a way to get to work. And one of the things that the people did that set up the boycott was say, look, what we're gonna do, we're gonna use the cabs. And they used some of the black cab drivers. The bus ride was 40 cents. They were charging 10 cents. Somehow the city, the people that was behind the busing, got wind of that and started threatening the cab drivers, saying that you have to charge the same amount of money that the buses are charging, which is ridiculous. I can't tell somebody what to charge. So to combat that, the Southern Christian Leadership Council decided that, well, you know what? We'll at the end they decided we'll drive them ourselves. We'll use our own cars, and they'll pay us a fee, and we'll use our own cars. But the bottom line is they was able to circumvent this threat to try to make them use these buses. And then that's when Dr. King and one of the other people's houses was bombed because they were still trying to put pressure on them to get on the bus. Let's face it, if the majority of your riders are African American, but yet you treat them like they're second and third and fourth class citizen or no citizen at all, and then they say, well, you know what, we're not going to ride the bus, and all of a sudden the buses are going down, and they try to infiltrate them by going out and saying, hey, the boycott was over, tried to bring that to the media, tried to go to some of the other ministers and talk to them, and when they got wind of that, they diffused that. It wasn't true. They stayed together. If we as a race of people or people in the United States in general, the way people were back then, to hold a boycott in that era, okay, in the 50s, and then stick to it for well over a year, that was dedication. Some of the people here today can't stick to stuff for 15 minutes and won't even get together and attempt to organize anything. But back then, it was definitely more solidarity, because that's a long time to go. You know, and actually, honestly, finding other ways to work by trying to keep your job and keep a roof over your head and food in your mouth and clothes on your back and for your kids. And at the same time, you went, you know, that was a long time. Like I said, 382 days is a long time, you know, to what, 60 weeks or something of constantly getting other ways to your jobs. And finally, the city and the state there had to finally break down and realize that these people were going to hold firm. The glue that they used to hold themselves together was firm. It was tight. It wasn't going to be compromised. And once they realized they couldn't compromise it, it took them over a year to realize they couldn't compromise. At the time, all they wanted was to be treated fairly. But once they realized that the boycott was working so well, they wanted desegregation completely. They wanted to sit wherever they wanted to sit on the bus, and that's where they should be allowed to sit. They didn't want to have to worry about this, we'll give you a little bit of this and you give us a little bit of that. No, they wanted total desegregation, and that's what it should have been. And money talks, and I always say to people, even to this day, in 2011, at the end of the day, it's going to be about the money. And that time, it was about the money, because the bus, the transit system was all but come to a screeching halt. They couldn't keep going without those fares. They finally realized the majority of people that they was trying to dictate where they would sit at was the people that was keeping them in business in the first place. And so, after 382 days, the boycott ended, desegregation was in place, and everybody, well, you know, of course, the people that was a part of the boycott was happy, but I'm sure the people that didn't want them on the bus, then people started trying to bomb the buses, and they started doing all kind of other crazy things, and, you know, stuff to try to make the people scared, and just try to wreak revenge on them, because they were intelligent enough to not only form a boycott, but they was intelligent enough to have the fortitude to see in advance what they needed to do to keep solidarity. And they've done it. And I commend them, people back in that era, for doing that, because we need to learn from them today. Because today, if we leap forward to now, to 2011, you can't seem to do anything, because everybody's individuals. Everybody's only worried about themselves. There's a lot of selfishness going on. And they need to step back and take a look at some of the things that went on back then. In them days, when people in those days had a lot less opportunities and a lot less laws in their favor than we have today. So the now and then can't compare to one another. Because I'm not calling people gutless today, but I can say the people in that era had a lot of guts. And they showed it every day, as they did a lot more with a lot less than we're doing today with a lot more. I'm going to say that again. They did a lot more with a lot less than we are doing today with a lot more. You go tell me, why is that? Because I don't understand, because people today whine and cry about all kinds of things when they have all kinds of other opportunities that they didn't have back then, and further back than that. I mean, I know a lot of people get upset and they think that, well, okay, so then what? What happens after this? What happens after all these things that went forward? Well, I'm just trying to look at the then and the now, because I think that's what counts, the then and the now. I mean, if you don't know where you were, then how do you know where you're going? If you don't know that you were worse off, how do you know you're better off? You have to know where you came from in order to know where you're going. It's just the way it is. There's no two ways around that. You can't use a barometer to figure out where you're at in life if you don't even know where you came from. You know what I'm saying? And how do you know your car's running bad if you haven't never driven a new one? You know what that means? If things are bad and you never had it good, you won't really necessarily know it's bad sometime, because you have nothing to compare it with. We have the then and we have the now. If you want to know how bad it was, then you go back and you look up your history. You go out there online and you Google and you find out, or you use any search engine you want to use, actually. I don't want to just be throwing out Google. Use anyone you want to use. My producer liked Google, that's probably why I said that. Use anyone you want to use to find out what went on, what is the history of Dr. King, and the people that came after him, and the people that was there before him.